Hello, listeners. So excited to have you. I met Josephine Guckiean recently, and just what an incredible story. I thought we have to share this, and especially as we're approaching International Transgender Day of Visibility, which is March 31st.
Mhm.
So meet Josephine. Josephine is a woman with a transgender experience who is passionate about standing up for those who can't stand on their own and to be a voice for the voiceless. Hey, Josephine.
Hi.
Well, I thought we'd just start with your story. It's beautiful, it's messy, it has all the elements of humanity in it. And I know a lot of people think they don't know somebody that has a transgender experience, or they don't understand it and they're afraid to kind of ask or learn more about it. So I'd love it if you would be so kind to share your story, so that our listeners can learn more about your experience and the experience of others.
Of course. I'll give the abridged version because the story is quite long and we don't have that much time in this podcast. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and back then very conservative. It's still kind of conservative in today's realm, but way more conservative back then. And I grew up in a neighborhood that was just black and white. There was no other ethnicities within the neighborhood. And I had a what I consider a fairly normal childhood. I played, with my bike, rode my bike, climbed trees. But there was also another side where I played with dolls and dressed up and, secretly with my girlfriends. So the great thing was, well, you can take this one of two ways. It could either be my parents didn't care or weren't around, or they didn't care and they were around. But regardless, I was able to do both gendered things
Hmm.
in my childhood. I played in the mud, I climbed trees, I built tree houses, I scraped my knees, but I also played dress up and played with dolls and, put makeup on and stuff like that in secret. And that was really a great outlet for me because a lot of people today don't have that because there's so many eyes on you. Back then, I'm a Gen Xer, right? I was born in 71, so I grew up during the 70s and the 80s, and it was a different time then. Nobody
Mhm.
cared. Like, go outside, play, do whatever you don't back in the house until the lights come on, the street lights come on, right?
I grew up in Ohio in the 80s. I can attest to that.
There you go. So, throughout my childhood, it wasn't really until I was about 10 years old that I felt that there was something different, right? Right on the cusp of puberty, few years, few years away from puberty, but was feeling like, why can't I be a girl? Why can't I just be a girl full time? And I didn't know how to handle that, right? Um, there weren't any tools. There weren't, the internet wasn't there. It wasn't in the books that we were taught. There wasn't in the Britannica encyclopedia that our parents bought us, right? So throughout my, preteens, my teens, I struggled with my identity and very, depression and suicidal ideation because I just couldn't be who I wanted to be.
Hmm.
At one point, you know, decided, I'm going to assimilate with society and do all the normal guy things, right? So I met my future wife in high school. I was a sophomore, she was a junior. And we dated all throughout high school. And well, after she graduated, she was a year ahead of me. So when she graduated and then I graduated, I moved in with her and her family. And we got married in 93. And in 95, we had our daughter. Her name's Tiffany. And even throughout the marriage, I still struggled with it, right? And there were things that I did myself that I kind of kept the woman inside me at bay. I tried to feed her cookies, but she wouldn't. You
That
know,
wasn't
it worked
enough.
sometimes, but other times it's like I need more. So, I would experiment with eyeliner, right? So I would leave the house in the morning to go to work, and then I would put the eyeliner on and lipstick, whatever. And then when I got there, take it off. It was
Mm,
these little things that helped me feel better,
yeah.
right? And kept that want at bay.
Mm,
So sadly, in 2007, my wife passed away. And for the next 11 years, I still struggled with myself, finding myself, right? I had still had the suicidal ideation. I was so close to ending it all so many times because I just couldn't be who I am.
right.
And then in October of 2018, I remember this vividly. I woke up one morning and it was like, this is it. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being unhappy, being depressed, and this woman in me has to come out.
Mm,
So I went upstairs. We were still living together, right? Even after my wife passed away, I was still living with the family. We spent 32 years together. And I told them that I was transgender. I finally had a word for it because up until that point, I didn't know what it was. It just clicked, even with Caitlyn Jenner coming out, and Laverne Cox and seeing other things, right? It was like, that's what it is. That's who I am.
yeah. Because up
And
until then, the words that we used were not very inclusive, right? They weren't words
they
you
were
probably
not.
used for yourself,
Yeah, one of them is still used today, transsexual, which isn't a thing, right?
right?
You can't change your sex and it's immutable. Your,
Right.
your biology is your
That
biology.
is biological. Yes.
Yes, regardless, biology is biology. So we spent hours talking about what it means to me to be transgender. And eventually I ran out of words. I couldn't explain it anymore. They still had questions. So we started watching a TV show on TLC, and most of the viewers probably know this show, I Am Jazz.
Mm,
So a little plug for I Am Jazz there. Um, she knew she was trans at 3 years old, and her family embraced it and built this whole life around it. And that really helped the family understand where I was coming from,
yeah.
right? The next hurdle, oh, and the other thing, when I came out, I got rid of all my guy clothes that day. They all went in crash bags, and I inherited clothes from my sister-in-law and my mother-in-law.
Oh,
Yep,
that, I mean, that's a step in allyship is trying to embrace it in some way. Yeah. I can
exactly.
only imagine. Yeah, that's very cool. How freeing was it to discard those clothes?
It was amazing. It was amazing. Now I held on to some t-shirts that I liked, right? Because t-shirts are t-shirts. They're
Yeah,
androgynous, right?
yeah,
Um, but like the khakis and the polos and stuff like that, I wanted to embrace the whole experience, and they helped me with that.
it's great.
And the only problem I had was my shoes. So as a guy, I wear a size 15.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, they don't
So
make women's shoes that big.
nope, because that's a size 17 in women's,
Oh
right?
my God.
Yeah, horrible, horrible. I was
I have
able to,
size 10 women's and I struggle, so I can only imagine, Josephine.
yeah. I did find a site, shoes.com, where it's like an outlet for shoe manufacturers, right? So
Yeah.
basically, all I could find were like drag queen style shoes, right?
Oh,
In my
wow.
size, obviously, because drag queens are, what they are. And so I did find three pair of just black shoes. Now they are 3-inch heels. So, I'm 6'2". So that makes me 6'4",
You're just
right?
a tower.
Or 6'5", 6'5", 6'5", 6'4", around in there, right? And they're cute shoes. I mean, but they're black, no style to them really. It wasn't until last year when I went to Mexico that I actually had custom made shoes made for me. There
Oh,
was a market there, and the guy took a template of my foot and I now bought 16 pairs of shoes.
wow.
At
That
at
strikes at like
five,
the business opportunity of exclusion, right? Like there is
yeah,
money. We're in a capitalist society for better or worse. Like
I
there's
know,
money to
and
be made by addressing the needs of historically marginalized people.
exactly, exactly. So now if I need any more shoes, I won't need any for right now. I have his WhatsApp number. I text him a picture and he'll make the shoes and ship them to me,
That is so
right?
cool.
At $30 a shoe.
Oh,
And
wow.
they're full leather. Full leather.
Win-win.
Yeah, yeah, it's a win-win. So anyway, the next hurdle was, society coming, being myself in society. I was very, very rough at the
Mhm.
very beginning, right? Square jaw, flat top haircut, it was just like, and then letting my hair grow out. And then
Mhm.
so I came out in 2018. I didn't start hormones until March of 2019.
Mhm.
And that's when the transformation started
Yeah.
because the hormones redistribute fat. They change your face look, right? The fat kind of
Like
fills
more
in the
oval. Yeah.
jaw, yep, and all that. So there was one instance in public, and I think this was the only time that it was apparent to me that I was still guy looking. I was in
Yeah.
Target and I was in the cosmetic section, and this lady and her daughter maybe 5 or 6 years old in the cart. The mom is looking at nail polish, and the daughter looks at me and then looks at her mom and said, "Mommy, what's that man doing?"
Mm.
Right? And I was like, okay, well, I need some more work I need to do some more work, right? But it, I didn't take it as a negative. I took it as the way humans are wired. We are facial recognition
Pattern recognition
beings.
machines. Yeah.
And it's from little. Like babies can discern between a man and a woman within milliseconds, right? Because our facial structure lends us to that, right? So, then, I came out in public and I was scared to death inside, but nobody on the outside knew because I exuded confidence. I didn't hang my head as I'm walking. My head
Yeah.
was up, my shoulders were back. You know, I was proud to be who I am despite being ready for any violence that comes my way.
Yeah.
And none
Yeah.
came, fortunately, for me.
Yeah.
I'm probably 1% of the population that hasn't had any violence or words or anything thrown towards me that I had to defend myself.
Hmm.
Um, the next hurdle,
That is sad and I mean
it
also
is
good
sad.
for you.
It's good for
But
me because it allowed me to flourish in myself. The next hurdle was work. Um, and I wasn't even scared about work. At the time, I was on 3 different teams. And what I did was I came out to each team individually, and then I came out to Deloitte as a whole. And I was met with love and admiration and encouragement every step of the way. And I lend that to I built a network and a following of leaders and colleagues that value me as a human, not what I look or sound like.
yep. Hmm.
And that really helped. It probably would have been different if I was on a team where there was a lot of bigotry and off-color jokes and I pick up on those things. And as a trans person, our ears are super tuned to words,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it's a precursor for violence, right? Like if you let those racist, sexist jokes pass by or microaggressions even is a signal that other things are to come. I
Yep.
think that's what organizations don't realize microaggressions, even the word makes it sound small, but it's
But it's
big.
not. It's
Yeah.
not. I'm really good at reading facial expressions, body language, and that lends me the ability to pivot in, whatever I'm talking about. Because if I
Yeah.
pick up on something, if I say something and then I see like an eyebrow raised or the corners of
Or
the
like a
mouth,
shrimp brace. Yeah.
yeah, and I will stop and I was like, well, let's talk about that. I saw your reaction to what I said.
Hmm.
How do you feel?
Hmm.
Like what I said, how did that make you feel? And then we have a dialogue about it, right?
Yeah.
And it goes back to when people ask me questions, I want to ask you something, but I don't want to sound offended or I don't want to offend you or sound ignorant. I said, just ask the question.
Yeah.
You can't hurt me,
Mhm.
right?
And you'll
So,
correct them if they say
and yeah,
something.
and if they say something that is incorrect, then I'll correct them and hopefully bring understanding and learning to the conversation so that they can take that forward and correct other people. And going back to allyship, right? Allyship is the foundation of our community because allies are in rooms we're not in.
Yep.
Allies are at tables speaking our names when we're not there. Allies are defending us when it matters.
Yep. I love that. I love that. And it sounds like you would proactively build up a network of allies at Deloitte so that you could come out in a much more authentic way. I wonder, Josephine, for other folks that might be thinking, I'm not sure how I would react or like how could I approach this in the workplace? Like tips on how conversations like we should be having that we're not about transgender issues in the workplace.
It has gotten better in the last 5 years. We're kind of going backwards now, right? With the whole
Like all
EO
great social
came out.
movements, they got to go backwards. They got to go forwards to go backwards.
Right, exactly. With the EOs and stuff, a lot of companies are pulling back their DE&I programs and whatnot. And, where we were once out and proud, we're now hiding and afraid because we don't know what's going to happen company-wise,
Yeah.
right? For instance, let's say you're on a contract, on a federal contract as a contractor, and you can't be yourself. You're at the client site and you can't use the bathroom that you're supposed to be using based on your gender, not sex,
Right.
right? I could see people being let go because it would be they would be let go under the guise of, well, we don't have work for you, right?
Mhm.
When in reality, it's because of the constraints at the client, right? So things like that, our leadership needs to stand up for us.
Yep.
You know, everybody's in the business of money. Everybody's in the business of making money, and they want to make the most money ever, right? But sometimes that comes at a cost, a real human cost. It could be a life cost
Mhm.
because now that person is out of work. They can't find work because their niche is government contracts or whatever, right?
Mhm.
They're not
Yep.
getting hired. And it's a spiraling effect where it lends to homelessness and eventually it could lend to suicide.
Mhm.
And since the Orange Man has come into existence,
Yeah.
um, the suicide rate has skyrocketed in the trans community. In
That's-
fact, I'm a big supporter of the Trevor Project,
Mhm.
and they have a lifeline. The Trevor Project has a suicide prevention hotline for the trans community from age 13 to 25, and it went up by 200%, the calls, right? The trans community in this country are in crisis right now. And with companies cutting back their DE&I programs, and there's more oppression happening because of it, companies have a duty to
Mhm.
protect their employees.
Yeah. Yeah, and it does affect, I think some people think this is such a small issue. I mean, yes, when we think about, sports, I'm always like, this, how many people is this affecting? Like, why are we so focused on this issue, right? But like you said, in the corporate environment, and even 1 to 2% of your workforce, of the, communities you hope to serve, it's a big enough subset that we need to pay attention. And like you said,
Hmm.
those human issues are costing us all. If you're around someone that doesn't feel safe, you're going to feel that too. It's not just you, Josephine. It's people we all interact with, and we can't do our best work when we don't feel safe.
Exactly.
I wonder for Visibility Day coming up, can you explain? Because there's a few different transgender holidays or
Hmm.
cultural celebrations. I'd love it if you could distinguish.
Hmm.
Remembrance Day is in the fall, and there's a Awareness Week also in November. Um, distinguish the differences for us, and maybe offer some tips for companies or organizations or ERGs that are like, "Hey, we want to highlight this. We want to be supportive, right? What can we do?"
So the two, what I call the bookends of the year for the trans community are Trans Day of Visibility, which happens on March 31st of every year, and the Trans Day of Remembrance on November 20th of every year. There's more information on the Remembrance Day than there's the Visibility
Yep.
Day. The Trans Day of Remembrance was started by Rita Hester back in 91, I believe, where there was a trans woman murdered in her town. Um, if you look up the Wikipedia on Trans Day of Remembrance, it gives you the whole rundown of what happened. But
Yep.
there were actually three women that were trans women that were killed in the prior year. And Rita felt it necessary to remember these women because they were being forgotten.
Mhm.
So she began the Trans Day of Remembrance on November 20th because it was the 1 year anniversary after the murders. And in fact, it happened at the same spot, both women, right? It was like a year apart.
I try not to let this stuff get to me, but it really does.
It
It's
does. It does.
scary.
I get very emotional. And I hold, within Deloitte, I hold a Trans Day of Remembrance call at a global level. And I'm very intentional about inviting in other trans folk, whether you're
Mhm.
trans or non-binary, from other countries. So I've
Mhm.
had people from Japan, Luxembourg, um, Mexico, Canada, the UK come on and tell their story because here in the US, we know one narrative, right? We know how our climate is and how it's been. But
Mhm.
in other countries, some of them are worse
Yeah,
than us,
and some are
right?
better.
And some are better. I mean, take Japan, for instance. Japan has a huge pride celebration. They finally legalized gay marriage, and it's growing. It's growing, right? As the new generation has come up, and this is how it happens, right? Even in India, I think it's been 4 years now that gay marriage had been legalized, but there's still that generational turnover. Until there's a complete turnover, you're still going to have the old way of thinking with the elders about what is and isn't, right? The youth are fighting back against that, but because of cultural constraints,
Mhm.
the elders speak, the youth listen, right?
Yep.
But until there's a generational turnover, you're still going to have that.
Yep.
Here in the US, it's not so much that. It's more administrative turnover that, get things back on track. So,
And power. Who has the money?
yeah, yeah, exactly. India has the caste system. We have a class system,
Yep.
right? So, Trans Day of Visibility, though, is more of out and proud. It's more like Pride Month in June, right? It's
Okay,
a
fine.
day for the trans community to be visible. Because visibility is going back to our earlier conversation
Yeah,
in this
you're
chat,
taught to
right?
be invisible. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you, I am sure most of the readers or readers in the column and listeners of the podcast know a trans person or have
Hmm.
seen a trans person or a non-binary person, right? You don't necessarily have to look like me to be in the trans community.
Yeah.
Trans men, they blend a little easier because it's a little easier to, grow the facial
Yeah.
hair and the muscles
Oh, I
start
thought
building.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, they assimilate a lot. They're able to hide easier,
Yeah.
right?
And
And
people
even
don't
the
see that as
voice,
much of an issue with trans men as trans women. The violence
exactly.
rate is much higher. That's always struck me as odd. And listeners, if you're curious about this, Laverne Cox's documentary Disclosure on Netflix is definitely helpful to understand that issue, but it is mind-blowing.
It is. It is. That was an amazing documentary. So for trans women, and I think that's why the focus is so much on us because we were, well, still are male, right? Presenting as female or woman,
Right.
but there's a whole misconception about our abilities. I will tell you, everybody listen up. I will tell you that since I started hormones, I can't lift things like I used to. I used to be able to lift 250 pounds off the floor. I can barely lift myself off the floor now.
Yeah, the
Right?
upper body strength. I mean, that is the one
It
big
goes
physical
away.
difference. That is real. That is
It
a
is
real
real,
thing between men and
right?
women biologically. Yes.
Um, because the hormones, like I have no testosterone left, right? I'm at
Yeah.
like a 4 in my blood test, and my estrogen is at like what they call mid-cycle. It's weird. I haven't had a cycle in my life, but according to the levels of estrogen, I'm
Yeah.
at 142, which is
Okay.
good, right? It's a
Yeah.
good number, but it comes at a cost. It comes at you can't build muscle mass. You can only
Mm,
tone,
yeah.
right? And that's
Yep.
why female bodybuilders have to take testosterone
Mhm.
in order to build that muscle mass.
Yeah. That's
So,
interesting.
if you're playing sports outside of high school, you're above 18 and you're playing college sports or whatever, and you've been on hormones, there is no empirical evidence that
Hmm.
shows trans women are better at it than cisgendered women.
I think that's
There's
such
no
a
evidence of it.
fascinating controversy that people get so enthralled by this issue. And I always ask, like, do you know someone that's been affected by this? Like, is there something that you have experienced that makes this such a big problem? Never get a good answer to that.
No, no, because in reality, of the population of the US, which is 350 million people, give or take,
Yeah.
0.6% are trans and non-binary. Zero point 0.6.
And then how
That's like
many
a
play
million
sports,
people.
right? And then like what age, and
If you
as we
look
get
at
older,
the trans report, I think they just published it, so it's out there. All the numbers are out there of the population. The demographics from this age bracket to this age bracket to that age bracket, and and it's pretty much the same within Deloitte. We have about 0.6% of people who self-identify as trans, right?
yeah,
That's not to say that's the whole population
right.
because it's based
Yeah.
on self-identification, as is the trans report, right?
Yep. Yep. That's
But
true.
it's interesting that it's at the same percentage level as the US, right?
Right. And we know that a lot of people are closeted or just about
Oh, of
being
course.
lesbian, gay,
Of
let
course.
alone trans, non-binary, queer that may not be even less socially acceptable. So we probably don't have accurate real numbers on that. But
It, yeah,
you're right. It's not, it's it's interesting. It feels like just a great example of distracting people's attention on an issue
it
instead of
is.
having a real issue at hand about violence. I would much rather focus our energies on what can we do to stop violence against trans people versus talk about
Fueling it. They're fueling it, right? Because people, whatever level of ignorance they have, feel as though the people in power know what they're talking about.
Hmm.
And the people in power tend to twist the facts about our community and make us demons,
Hmm.
deviants, all the things, right? Again, go back, watch Disclosure. You'll hear about all of this of how cinema and TV have
Made us
vilified
scared.
us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I used
And
to watch horror movies in the 80s and 90s. I had not thought about how many negative messages I was fed. I'm sure it shaped my perception.
of
I
course,
won- I wonder, Josephine, for people that really want to be better allies, that, probably I think a lot of us just in general right now, DEI is the boogeyman, so everyone's scared. But, you know, most people attitudinally, poll after poll, study after study shows, most people want to be inclusive. Most people
hmm
want to be good people. Most people want to honor and celebrate with communities that are historically marginalized. And
right.
I don't think the transgender community, once you get to know folks and the issues at hand, is any different than race, gender, etc. I mean, obviously, our issues are very unique,
hmm
but I wonder, because that learning curve, because there's so much separation and misunderstanding, if people want to be better allies, especially with Visibility Day, like, are there practical, like, actionable things people could do?
Amplify our voices.
Mhm.
Educate yourself on the issues that we're facing. And if your thinking aligns with it,
Mhm.
and you want to be an ally for the community, we don't even have to know who you are, right?
It's not about you.
It's not about you. It's about you correcting the wrong messages that are being perpetuated. You
Mhm.
know, let's say you're in a room, a meeting, or you're at a community center, and somebody says something that you know is wrong about the trans community. Speak up if you're safe, if it's safe enough to speak up, right?
Right.
But use your voice.
Mhm.
That's Allies are our biggest weapon
Yeah.
against the rhetoric that is being thrown towards us.
Mhm. And it
Um,
really just say, like, that's not okay when somebody says something that's really disturbing, or even
mhm.
just like you said, the small jokes or, isms and the things that make your stomach turn a little bit. Like, just say something like,
I,
hey, that's not okay.
right. I have a little anecdote. So early on in my transition, I was at work in Tennessee, and I was waiting. And this was early on. This was like 2019. I would say probably spring of 2019. I may have just started hormones, and I was waiting outside a room, waiting for a meeting for my meeting to start to go in. And this person walks by whom have known since I started at Deloitte 16 years ago. And at that point, it was 10 years ago. And they came back and they were like, seriously? Is what they said to me, right? So I walked up to them and I was like, yes, this is me. This is the real me who's been hiding out for the 10 years that you've known me. And I took the time to educate this person. Now, I knew based on visiting their cubicle that they were very religious, right? There's crosses and Bibles and all this stuff in the cubicle. But I felt as though they were misguided on what a trans person is, what they feel, what they've been going through. So I spent like 15 minutes. I was late for my meeting, but I spent like 15, 20 minutes bringing understanding to this individual. And I felt at the end of the conversation that they understood me and that they would take that back to their circles of influence
Yeah.
and correct their thinking.
Hmm. That's a big
And
deal.
hopefully it was an exponential increase in awareness because, you tell one person, they tell 10, and those
Like
10 tell,
dominoes.
and it
Yep.
just keeps going on and on and on, right? Um, the one thing that is still causes me pain is the relationship with my daughter or the lack thereof. She lost her mom when she was 11, and essentially lost her dad when she was, how old was she? 20? So it was 2018, 18, 23? She's like 23 years old, essentially. But I still, you know, reach out. I send text messages, send flowers on her birthday, cards. I let her know that the door is still open. I haven't closed the door on her. And she can walk through it at any time that she feels comfortable in doing so. And I hope she listens to this podcast because, this is a message for you, Tiffany. It's like, I'm here. I'm happy. And, I just want to be part of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I can only imagine. That kind of stuff really gets me because it's just not fair that
Yeah.
we have we have a world where certain people are accepted and others don't. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of grief. So I empathize. You empathize with everybody in the
Yeah.
story
Yeah.
because it's real. As somebody that's lost their parents, I feel the grieving part of that too. So
I was like, no, I'm not crying on this. But
you got
little,
me too.
I know, I know.
Well,
Um,
listeners, this has been a real treat. Josephine, thanks for being so vulnerable and sharing your story. I agree with you. The more that we share our stories, the more allies that we have to amplify the stories. We humanize the issue. It's really hard to hate human beings, right? If
exactly.
you can see the humanity in them. And that's exactly the weapons that are being used against the trans community right now is to
Hmm.
dehumanize. And we have to draw a line there. That is not okay for anybody, let alone a huge community of people that aren't trying to hurt anybody. Just
Exactly.
trying to be visible. That's all this is about is
It,
visibility.
visibility and living our lives on our own terms
Yeah.
and not what
Yeah.
other people say we need to live it by, right? One thing I tell people is we're no different than you. If you took all of humanity and took away all of our skin, all of our muscles, all of our ligaments, and there were just skeletons lined up, could you tell who's who aside from male and female, right?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, right. Race,
You can tell
certainly.
who's who. That is what binds us all together. We're all humans. We're all in this together. We all have our own struggles. We all have our demons that we have to deal with. Why are we turning on each other?
Yeah. We're so much stronger together. So much. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I hope to be an ally for you, Josephine. I'm so thankful for you sharing your story. And listeners, if you're listening on audio, Josephine does have a very nice outfit and presentation today, and I appreciate the banners in the background. So,
Mhm.
giving just some love over on the video. If you want some ideas on how to celebrate, there's there's a great visual in your background of
Yep.
signage, things that we
Yep.
can. So thank you, Josephine, for your time today. I'm really thankful for sharing your story.
And thank you for having me, Julie. I really appreciate it.